Welcome to another episode of the Well podcast here at ARCHE at KCPCH, where this season we are grabbing a host of different guests and just really getting into their lives and just asking them to speak about how God has been present in the things that they're doing and in their stories, and just really discovering and getting to know different folks from all different places. We are so blessed and encouraged and just fortunate to have Grace Kim James on with us again, who was our first guest of this season, who kind of kicked off this season's idea anyway. And just to be able to get a little bit deeper into her life, we talked a lot about just kind of, I think, how she got to where she got to, some of those different things, but we wanted to get a little personal today and get into the meat and potatoes, as they say, of these things. So Grace, thank you for joining us again. It's our pleasure to have you.
Hi, Pete. Thank you for having me again. I feel very honored to be back on the show, but you're my friend, so yeah, I'm here for you anytime.
Yeah. So this is good. I think, we were, for all the people who are listening, we've had so many technical difficulties today. We've done this for 3 or 4 times. And so I asked Grace a little while ago when I thought I was recording, we weren't recording, how New York is. And so, I think we were just kind of talking about how we've flipped places in terms of where New York was at the beginning and where we're here in Houston, Texas. And obviously we've kind of flipped sides of that. But how is New York? Obviously, it's doing better statistically, but how is kind of the vibe in the city?
New York's doing a lot better. We are on the other side, unlike a lot of the rest of the country. Most everyone's wearing their masks. It's really just uplifting to see that people are returning to some sort of normalcy. After, at the height of it, I was running by or driving by the hospitals with like the freezer trucks outside. So it's a complete 180. I hope the rest of the country catches up. But you can tell the city has changed. Homelessness is on the rise. Just a little, there's some crazy things going on, and a lot of people have moved out of the city, but I love New York City, so I won't be leaving anytime soon. Yep.
That is your home. You've made it your home more than half of your life now. So, or just about half your life, I guess, exactly 50-50. It's crazy. It's a little surreal because I remember when we were recording the first podcast, I was like, man, I was worried for you because you're living in the epicenter, and now it's flipped upside down. Where earlier, before we started recording, you were asking how Texas was and things of that nature. And we were just saying how you were willing to come to Texas before, but now it's like, nope, we ain't doing it because Texas is going crazy. So it's just crazy how life changes so quickly. Before we get into some of the meaty things for our viewers, just to give you a little bit of thing, I promised on the first episode, for those of you who listened or who are watching or following us, that hopefully that I'd be able to dig up of some pictures that Grace and I are actually friends from old, and we're not just making this stuff up. So I did find some pictures for the listeners. My parents moved to Texas from Virginia, which is where we're both from, not too long ago. And then they just happened to have a box full of old pictures, and I was going through them, and I was able to find some of these. And so I apologize. At least on the Zoom call, I'm going to just hold them up to the camera. We might maybe edit them in, scan them in, and do that kind of post. But here is a couple. This is from graduation. Actually, we'll go in chronological order. This is from a orchestra trip that we took either to Tennessee or to Disney World or whatever, but there it is. You can see Grace right in the middle in the white. Those are all of our friends from orchestra.
I remember the trip, but I don't remember where we went.
Yeah, and I don't remember either.
I'm like, oh, that's Melly, and that's Kim, and Gloria, and I don't remember Mihi, and I can't remember.
Yep. But yeah, I think this is Tennessee. I think this is the one we went to Nashville, right? And then these are two pictures.
I'm like, I think it's Disney World.
Wait, it could be either or. But we're in some sort of like museum or something there. These are pictures from graduation. I'll show you this one first because this is a little bit grainier. But that's Grace dead center, and then my head of with the cap right behind it. If we zoom in a little bit more, there. We are. That's all I'll say. And then here's a better, more open, like kind of from a different angle. I don't know who took this one, but there's Grace dead center.
Is literally the same, except I have better eyebrows.
I'm telling you, you haven't changed. I do not look anything like what I used to look like. I hope that's a good thing, but you have not changed. Again, if you were walking around, and the way that you're dressed today is kind of like, more of like the way I used to dress in high school with just a t-shirt and whatnot.
I really do look like I'm 17. Wow. Okay.
But I'm telling you, you haven't changed. But because those photos, you can't really see how I looked. And if anyone's interested in the way, you can just, if you're Facebook friends with me, I have old embarrassing photos of myself from college all on my Facebook just for anyone. So you just have to look it up. But then here's one that I found out. This is a baby picture that Grace actually has seen, but this is me when I was a
Yeah.
little kid. So for all those folks who are interested, that's me. And if you know any of my kids, and of course they're behind me on the wall, this apparently is like a carbon copy of Mason.
Mason.
And then
Yeah.
my cousin Linus, who's not in some of these graduation photos, he actually Instagrammed one time, a long time ago, a picture of me when I was a kid and a picture of Mason, and it was uncanny. But just a little throwback. Grace and I are actually friends from high school, so there's the proof. But so it's just
And
really cool
middle
to be able to
school.
do this.
We
And
go
middle
back to
school, we
middle
started.
school.
Yeah, 7th grade. And so this is actually really awesome to be able to do this. But yeah, today, kind of as we promised last time, we wanted to get a little bit deeper. I asked Grace if it was okay for us to kind of dig a little deeper into her life, for her to get a little bit more personal with us, because her life is very interesting. We alluded to it, but Grace's husband, Mike James, is an author, but he's also Black. He's African American. And so that obviously kind of changes the way kind of your life is in a lot of different ways. It changes a lot of things culturally. So we kind of want to talk about that a little bit, because you can give us a perspective that a lot of Asian Americans, particularly the ones that I think might be listening to this from my church and from just an audience, although it might be growing because of your presence, but that I think probably don't have like a viewpoint into, they don't have, access to. And then just some of the difficulties and some of the good things and just kind of the both and of all of that. And so we're going to get to a little bit more personal. And then kind of in the middle, we'll take a little break, and Grace, you're going to be prepared to share with us a really ridiculous or funny story that you can legally share about from your work and just kind of from the many things that you've done. So be prepared for that. I'll kind of in the middle interject and say, share with me one of the most craziest things that's happened being a part of the music industry, or maybe even at Atlantic Records and things like that. So, but let's first go into, your relationship with Mike. Tell us, how did y'all meet? How did it kind of happen? Give us the little romantic 411. Oh. It's one of those days, everybody. Life is funny.
Today is one of those days.
Today is one of those days. Just everyone also on the pod, you know how this is real life. Grace's AirPods are probably going to die in the middle, and then we're going to switch mics. But just deal with us. We'll make it. We'll make it through. It's just one of them days.
When you have like hardships like this, it usually means that it's going to be a really great like day and a really great product. And that's how the Holy Spirit moves. So my husband, Mike, and I met when I was in between gigs in the music business. I was just temping at ESPN because I was like, maybe the music business is not for me, because at that time, way back when, before you kids got to stream music, downloads and CDs were on the decline. So people were losing jobs in my business at the time when I was just getting into it and wanted to make more money. People were losing money. So I was like, maybe I want to go do something else. And I was a fan of sports. I think Pete knows that I was a overall like sports fan. I would, love basketball and like football and baseball, just watching and casually. So I was like, maybe I want to do that. And Mike was head writer at ESPN, specifically working on Stephen A. Smith's show. And we just kept in touch and, keeping in touch, being friends. And we never really had like an official start date of dating, but, we just long-term like stayed in touch and never thought anything would come out of it. Fast forward however many years, and now we're married. And I fast forward, but I'll focus and zero in on a part where like there was clearly an entry point where I had to introduce him to my family. And I'll never forget this. When I told my parents that I was bringing him home to meet them, their question was, is he American? Now, in my defense, they asked me if he was American. So I said yes.
So, sorry, clarification. Did they ask you in Korean? So in Korean, it would have been like, 미국 사람이야? So like literally like a person of America is like the direct translation. So American, okay.
I don't remember if they asked me in English or Korean, but I definitely remember saying yes.
Okay.
And in my opinion, I did not lie, because I
No,
did not.
he's
And
an American
so,
citizen.
correct. And, you know, I remember him showing up, and they were like, oh, yeah, come on in. And they definitely had a look where Mike had to look at me and say, you didn't tell them I was Black, did you? And I
Uh,
remember, I remember like laughing in the back of my mind. I'm like, their question was, are you American? And I answered appropriately. I did not need to share your race. So that's my favorite story to share.
hmm,
But anyway, so for many of you, I'm sure you understand that it was pretty much a shock. Not saying that our parents are racist or not racist, but it definitely is a different world. But
hmm,
over the years, they got to know him. You know, it was a little bumpy in certain places when it did come time to get married. They came around, but they've gotten to know him, love him, know that he's a man of God, and it ultimately worked out. I remember like crying about it at one point, and
hmm,
my parents and I were not speaking at one point about this. Um, you know, but it was a big uh, adult moment for me when I had to have that conversation of like, this is who I want to marry and this is who I want to spend my life with. Like, figure it out. And for a moment, there was a moment where I was like, man, I may not talk to my parents again.
hmm.
And it was like that, but it wasn't. We didn't talk for a week, and that was like terrible. Um, and now everything's peaceful.
Hmm.
So I don't know how else to describe that. It just sucked for a period, but
Hmm.
it's true what they say. They come around. And I remember other friends and family were telling me that would be the case, and I didn't believe them, but they were right.
Right. So after you brought Mike home for the first time, and then kind of the most difficult part, are we talking pretty immediately thereafter, or it was more like it was like absolutely certain that you guys were going to get married? Is that when kind of the tension escalated?
I don't think that they thought we were going to be a thing. Like, I think it was more like,
Mm,
oh, you know, they're dating, you know? And then it was like, okay, like, we'll be okay. We're going to be nice. They were never not nice to him. You
right.
know, they were very polite. They welcomed him, etc. And Mike and I come from very different backgrounds. Mike not only is Black, but he grew up in the foster care system and
Mm,
just comes from a very different family background. And I think that was a very big concern for them of like, you know, in Korean culture, it's very much about the family you're marrying into
right. Right.
and, you know, the, the baggage, for lack of a better word, that you come with. And it's either like a, hey, you marry up or you marry down in our culture. And it wasn't that for me. It was just like, hey, this is who I really care about. This person makes me better. Again, like on a spiritual level, intellectual level, all that stuff. And I think there were a lot of things culturally that my parents had to work around. And in hindsight, I was probably a bit more selfish because I was like, this is what I want. And I never for one second thought about what they would have to go through and how much
Right.
work that they would have to put in for this to happen. I
Mm,
think when we, because of this American lifestyle, we think, well, this is who I love and who I want to be with. We never think about like our parents and the relationship that they want to have with our spouse.
right.
And in hindsight, I did not take that into consideration at all.
Yeah.
And could I have been better in that area? Absolutely. And so, because of that, I think I make more of an effort now. But Mike also, personality wise, makes an effort himself and like loves them as his own. And I think that's what makes the difference is that I have a partner who makes that effort to know my culture, to embrace and support my culture, and, you know, doesn't do anything to change people and vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah, just for some context, I think, and this might be helpful to maybe some of our younger listeners who maybe struggling with this or dealing with it or whatever, or even, potentially thinking about, pursuing this quote unquote, like a non-traditional path in that capacity. I remember, so the way, Grace, you know this, but Christina, my wife, she's Korean, but she's the only Korean girl that I've ever dated, the first and only. And so first Korean girl I dated, and then of course I married her. So, but everyone before that, and so my dad was also very particularly worried that is he American thing is hilarious, because my parents would have said the same thing, and they would have meant white American. But and yeah, and I remember when I did marry Christina, and this was kind of the interesting thing. It's I think it's less racial and it is more just cultural and kind of their desire to get to know, because as many of us know, not every second generation Korean American like us can speak the language or know the culture very well. So there are a lot of us who just do not speak the language at all, and in many ways, parents would be just as much concerned with that as marrying a white person or anyone that's non-Korean, because it's the language. It's kind of a cultural thing that does indeed get in the way. And I can say that for certain, because obviously my parents moved to Texas not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, and just the kind of conversations we can all have in Korean is really, really helpful. And those are some of the things that I think my parents enjoy the most with in terms of my wife, and just her ability to speak the language and understand the culture. So I think for everyone who's listening, that's kind of their biggest thing. They just want to really love upon our spouses and love upon the family. Korean culture is very inclusive in the sense we can be exclusive to maybe people who aren't kind of in our circle or aren't part of our crew, if you want to look at it that way. But whoever is in, they want them to be in kind of every way, shape, and form. And so that's kind of the difficulty that they're going through. But yeah, you mentioned how obviously with Mike and just who he is, and how he loves the Lord, and just kind of share with me just kind of some moments where you saw like the tide turning. Obviously, I think your parents, because they love you, and I love your parents. Your parents are great people, and obviously there was kind of moments of tension there, but where did you really feel like the tide was turning from, oh, they're going to be cordial, they're going to be nice, they're going to obviously accept your decision and kind of love Mike because he loves you and you've chosen him, but where did you really feel like, was there a moment where you felt like, man, they're really beginning to love Mike, and it's not just a kind of a cordial, like nice thing, it's more like, man, they really enjoy this man and they really love him like a son, and what kind of, what happened there? Because, and I think that's a very interesting point, because I think, again, I fully expect that your parents would have treated Mike with the utmost care and just kind of, obviously being polite and all those things. But, you just told me kind of before we started recording that you were just there not too long ago with Mike visiting from home. And I know that there had to have been a moment where that kind of like you felt like it shifted, where it's like, oh, Mike is not just someone they accept because of me. Mike is someone that they love as one of kind of their own, if you want to use that language.
I think one of the major shifts came at a time when, for many different reasons, but like I won't get, without getting too much into it, there was a point when we were not speaking. And there was a point where we had a very big argument, and I'd never seen my parents so upset and broken. And then for me, it was a moment of like me standing up. I don't know about everyone else, but culturally, I'd lived the majority of my life just being very obedient to my parents. And, we are taught biblically to honor our parents. But I think honor is very different than being obedient. And I think I'd lived almost, I don't remember how old I was. I was probably 29 or 30 at that point. I'd lived almost 30 years of my life being obedient. And this was a point where I was not obedient. And I had to stand up for myself as an adult. And I think that was a very big turning point for them, where it was like, she's not a child. And I think in Korean culture, like no matter how old you are, parents treat you like children sometimes. And I think for them, they had to come to a point of reckoning of like, she's not a child anymore, and she's 30 and she has an entire life that we do not know about in a completely different state. So I think that was the first turning point. And then the next turning point was like when we got engaged and said we were getting married, and there had to be a choice that they made. And I think for both my mom and dad, they realized I can either choose to let this happen, I'd be angry about it, or I can choose to accept this and love. And I think that choice of love, like love, when we talked about love in the church, like love is not a feeling, it is very much a choice, and it's an act of service. Like
Yep.
they chose to love this person. And, now that we've been married 4 years, we've had different conversations, especially in the last few months, about race, about culture, and about all that. And my mom in particular has vocalized, like, it was never about this person's skin color. It's very much about their culture and also how he grew up very differently. And I was very concerned that he would not treat you a certain way because of how he grew up. Which is very interesting to hear, because I thought it was about race at one point, but it was everything that you said, Pete. They wanted to be able to have conversations with him, in a particular language. And they also thought because he grew up in a non-traditional setting, or an unconventional family setting, that he would not know how to take care of me and love me a certain way that they knew how. But they've come to see that that's not the case, and that's to say he's not perfect or is perfect. But it just took some time and conversations. And I think more than anything, the thing that I continue to learn is having conversations, and having difficult conversations is the only way to get there.
Yeah. No, that's critical. Yeah, I think that's what I've learned in my relationship. The whole point about being treated like a child. I have 3 children. The oldest one is going to be 10 in 2 months, and yet I'm still being treated like a child. And it's just funny. It's just kind of one of those dynamics. But yeah, just kind of, I think that really speaks, and for us as Koreans, and you're absolutely right. Like we think that we have to be obedient at all times, but that's just not it. Honoring and obedience is 2 different things. And I also loved how you highlighted this fact that your parents made a choice. In scripture, there's 4 different Greek words for love, and the one that Jesus uses most often is the word agape, and it's a willful choice that you make. And all the other ones are born out of feelings. All the other ones are born out of emotion. They're kind of natural, instinctual type of things. But agape is the one that you have to choose to do. You may not feel it, but it's the one that you choose, and it's the one that he is always telling us to do. When he tells us to love our enemies, it's to agape them, it's to choose to love them, even though we may not feel it. And that's just a beautiful story, I think. Kind of piggybacking off of that, even between you and Mike, just kind of in terms of you as people and in your relationship, 2 things. What was, I guess, 3 questions, and you can kind of answer them however you like. But kind of the 3 biggest questions that I had was, what were some of the greatest challenges for you as a person, as a woman? Obviously being in a relationship with Mike, with that come from, again, even the non-traditional family background, obviously different ethnicity, different race, different culture. So what were some of the greatest challenges for you? Question number 2, again, in any order you can take it. What have you most learned in your relationship with Mike that has taught you about, particularly about, I think, loving people, particularly about, just kind of who you are as a person, who God has made you to be, and just kind of the beauty of love and relationship in those ways? And then what has been the greatest blessing in terms of being married to him, Mike, and also just kind of what you feel like God has done in and through your relationship? So in any order you can take that, but those are some of the questions that I had.
I think the questions actually and the answers actually all tie together. One of the biggest challenges and the things that I've learned and love the most is, like, we communicate so differently. And one of it is I've had to learn how to communicate. And maybe not communicate, but like I've had to learn how to deal with confrontation. And Mike is not afraid of confrontation. And that's because he grew up in such a way, and he grew up being bullied, and at one point he had to confront those bullies. And when he learned how to stand up for himself, he just became very comfortable with confrontation because he was pressed. I listened to a great sermon this weekend about how, when grapes are pressed into wine, we as people are pressed, and like pressure is what like brings out character in us. And for me, growing up, being obedient, being a great student, being a great, like, hey, people just told me what to do and I did it, and that's how I got by life. I had to be pressed, and I had to be pushed to have difficult conversations. Like, and that's a lesson in life, I think, because we're often taught to say, nah, or like just do whatever our parents say. We were never, ever taught. No one ever taught me how to say, hey, this does not work for me, or I don't like this, or hey, Pete, I didn't like what you said to me the other day in class. You know, I never was encouraged to be vocal about that. And I think it's, in particular with Asian women, it's an even bigger thing because we're just told to act and behave a certain way. But I've always been fiery. I've always been outspoken in the sense of like, I was very, very chattery in school, I think. You know, I was very personable, you know, I was easy to get along with, but that ease of getting along was also tied to, I didn't stir the waters and I didn't tell people that I didn't like something. Instead, I really held it inside. So becoming an adult and being in a relationship with someone, you can suppress a lot of those feelings for a really long time, but ultimately there will be times where you're like, this doesn't work for me, dude. Like, you know, and I'm sure you and Christina do that too. We're like, hey, I didn't like how you spoke to me, or I don't like how you did this, or I don't like how you leave the socks on the floor, or whatever it is. And he, I think, has taught me most of all that not all confrontation is a bad thing. So it was a blessing to be put with someone who had no problem with confrontation. And for me to learn like, okay, this is how you can deal with confrontation in your own way. So that has probably helped me over the years, just like appreciate him for who he is. For me, just like grow as a person, in learning like this is how I want to deal with things, and also just being more honest with him has helped me be more honest with other people, because I think that's how you just become genuine.
Yeah, no, that's a critical point, because I think we have, particularly in a Korean American church, it's kind of our culture. We are shame avoidant, therefore we're conflict avoidant, and then of course when Korean people become conflict inducing, like we go ham, we just go crazy, like there's no middle ground, we suppress, and then of course then we explode kind of idea. And the funny thing is I think those who are willing to press us in appropriate ways, I think, are the ones that love us the most, and kind of challenge us to do that. And that's interesting that that's kind of the thing that you appreciate most and that you've been blessed by most. And yeah, kind of for reference, we always talk about kind of our past. Grace was not one to stir the waters back in high school. She was always doing the right things. I was more of the stir the waters type, although I wasn't even that bad. You know, there are a couple stories that we have, you know, from high school that we can tell. I think that'd be interesting in terms of that nature. But yeah, I think that's really interesting in terms of, and especially from your background and from your family, and then obviously Mike growing up in the background that he grew up in. Yeah, I think you know, that's interesting. Kind of continuing with this topic, one of the things that I think with what's going on in our nation, that I think is just been kind of on my heart is, as an Asian American, one of the things that, you know, kind of with all of the stuff that's happened with the police brutality and the Black Lives Matter movement that's kind of, you know, been born out of this pandemic in some ways. We as Asian Americans, I felt it, you know, no matter how, you know, educated we might feel, or no matter how much news read or whatever the case might be, there's just nothing quite like, you know, having a deep relationship, particularly the one of marriage, with someone that is not Korean, and in this case, obviously with someone who's Black. What are some of the things that you learned that you read that I think that this particular kind of time period over the last few months have taught you that you didn't even know before? Obviously, you've been married, and I've been dating Mike for many, many years, but is there anything that you learned specifically through what's happened of late that you didn't know before?
I think there are a lot of things that I've learned in the last few months. I think the news of George Floyd, and then Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and then the time of the pandemic has it's shown not just me, but the entire world, just like racial inequality all across the board. And one, I think the first thing that my dad said to me a while ago was like, I don't know why this keeps happening, but I think this is also the first time that I've realized this could be my son-in-law. And when he said that to me, I think that really shook me. The other thing that I've come to realize is that not just because of who I'm married to, but because of the work environment that I'm in, I realized I was so aware of the inequalities but I never did anything about it. And I think
Mm.
it was really alarming for me to come to terms with like, hey, I've known about this and I've never done anything. And that's a completely different thing. And I think for me, I was like, wow, I'm not as great of an ally as I thought I was. I thought being aware and, you know, being part of the conversation and being aware and trying to be attuned to it made me an ally. But being an ally means like you're doing something about it. So I think that's the other part. And then three, I think for me as an Asian American woman during the pandemic, one of the things that I really, really felt was like I just personally felt attacked because we were seeing the rise in hate crimes against Asians.
Mm.
And it was something that I think all of us have just never felt before. Like, I think growing up in Virginia, we all have experienced some sort of racism growing up. Absolutely. Like, racism is not a new thing for us. There were jabs here and there. There were remarks made about you being, you know, certain expletives, or, you know, that our food was disgusting, or, you know, that so and so is exotic, or the fetishization of Asian women. Like, all that stuff is not new to us, but there was something about COVID and Asians being attacked for COVID that felt very personal.
Mm.
And I think because of that, our community is like, who's going to stand up for us? Who's going to defend us? And there's a lack of leadership at the top for people who just, you know, to speak for us. It's taken me a long time to just like to separate the two. I think the one thing I want to share with my Asian brothers and sisters is that like the hate that we feel and the discrimination that we feel is nothing compared to the Black men and women who are literally being hunted and killed on a regular basis. And that was something that I had to learn recently, of just like hate crimes and hate is very different than like being killed. And that's something that we see on a regular, you know, on a regular basis. That is not to take away from our own experiences and our stories of like, yeah, there is a lot of hate towards Asians, and there is a lot of just crime against Asians that don't go, you know, that don't go noticed. And that is literally because what we were talking about, we are not speaking up. We are not, you know, we're not rattling the cages. And I think that's where it goes back to like, we need to do our part too. And I'm doing more of that, of like being vocal and supporting, you know, Asian stories and Asian voices. And I think we're seeing that now move. There are different blogs and different media outlets and different influencers that are coming out and being more vocal. I think, again, we're so worried about like rattling and shaking the cages that we don't speak out about it. And we need to. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be perfect, and it doesn't mean that you have to be a political activist. But I think using your voice and educating people about the different crimes is part of bringing awareness to this stuff. Like when I share certain stories of like Asian hate crimes, most Asians are like, oh, I didn't know about it. That's part of the problem, is that like we are not amplifying the people who are telling those stories. So if you see certain Asian news, you know, websites or blogs or whatever, we need to put our friends on it and we need to make it a thing. And then when you see the story about an Asian harmony, you know, being attacked and being burned and put on fire, like we need to put pressure on our local officials, on our media outlets, on our police officials to like do something about it. And that's where I think we're starting to see a movement right now happening with our young people, starting with ourselves. Actually, you and I are still, you know, in that age range that I think that have influence, that we can do something about it. And I, for one, am doing something about it. I am using my, you know, limited Instagram and social media following. I am using my influence on a corporate level. Like I am using my influence as a taxpayer to do something about it. And I would like to see more of us at the top. And because we're getting there.
I think for me, yeah, again, both of us, I would classify as very educated, highly intelligent, whatever. We're definitely not like, you know, deaf or blind to what's happening in our world and things of nature. But I think for me, the question that I have is even so for when I was hearing about kind of the Asians, kind of the Asian hate crimes during COVID, and I have to, and I've said this on this pod and different places and whatnot before. Oh, here we go. Her AirPods, I think, are dying. But I remember watching watching those and getting the news updates, and then feeling a little bit of an extra like, oh, but then just me personally speaking, it still didn't really hit home. Like I was concerned and I was praying and things of that nature. I think I can say I wasn't more like angered by that fact, than what was happening with, either Black lives or, other minority lives, all that kind of stuff. But I think the perspective that I would like to ask you is, because you're married to Mike and because he is a Black man, just like what you said about your dad, was saying like that could be my son-in-law. When did that ever hit home more specifically? Was it more recently, or is it like, way back? Because I can imagine that would be, it's just different, right? Where obviously being able to maybe vicariously live, the Black man experience or the Black experience through Mike, and kind of when that hit home, because that's just not something that any of us can simulate, right? Like you can't simulate it. You either have to be in it, you either have to know someone that's in it, or whatever the case might be. And so when did that become kind of, what was that moment, or, was there a moment or just kind of a time where you were like, man, this is what we're really dealing with, and kind of kind of like a moment of reckoning. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but you know what I mean?
I think I was like everyone else. Like even though I was aware of it, I think this period also woke me up, and I even had to have a conversation with Mike of like, man, I'm sorry that I have not been a great like partner or ally for you, and also as a spouse, like what can I do? And as a spouse, he was like, you're fine. But I also truly felt like, man, I'm not doing enough. But Mike and I, even before the whole George Floyd like turning point, and I'm going to say turning point, tipping point, breaking point, whatever you want to call it, I very much also was like, yo, I don't want you to go outside at night wearing a hoodie. Like I've had that conversation. I don't want you out late at night by yourself, blah, blah, blah. Or like even in New York City, like I'm more likely to hail a cab as opposed to him. Like those are real things that he and I have not only dealt with on a personal level, but have conversations about. Like he is legitimized in certain environments when I show up in my face. I was at a video shoot this weekend, literally in the hood in Philadelphia, and people were like, I'm glad Grace is here. And we laughed about it, but it's the truth. It is my face and my lighter skin makes people feel less threatened or makes it more like legitimate. So I think I'm not perfect either. Like I had a turning point for me even in these last few months. But I think the reason it was so personal for me, besides the fact that I was or am married to a Black man, is through Mike, I learned, like through my Black husband, how to love and appreciate my culture even more. Like, I don't know how you feel, Pete, but like I didn't have a mentor or a role model that taught me how to be proud of my culture and what to be proud of. If anything, my parents just told me to be proud, but no one ever showed me what was cool, what was like history, what to be proud of. And so I think because of that, Asians assimilating so significantly into American culture or white culture and being the model minority, we adapted white culture. And I think because of that, like we look to the white people for the role models of like, oh, you go to college, you go get your MBA or your law degree, and then you get a job in corporate America. Like that's success. And for me, I don't think I learned to really truly appreciate my culture until the last few years. And this is really corny to say, but like watching Crazy Rich Asians and seeing a bunch of beautiful, intelligent, well-spoken Asian people without, stereotypical accents was so moving to me. And I walked out of that theater and that screening being like, I did not know that this is what representation looked like. Like, I didn't know that was a feeling. And there was something that stirred inside of me of like seeing myself on screen in a bigger way that was like, man, that's what that feels like. Like, I need more of that. And especially for Asians, there's such a lack of representation of cool, of cool Asianness that like we don't know what that looks like for ourselves, that we don't know how to even further champion that for ourselves. And maybe I'm going off on a tangent, but I think these are all tied together of just like, you have to go through a self-exploration and you need to find people who bring that out of you, who amplify your voice, who support your discovery of your culture, the embracing of your culture, in order for us to continue to move the conversation forward about like who we are as a culture in this current environment, in this country, in our local neighborhoods, in our schools, all of it.
Yeah, no, that's such a critical piece to kind of who we are as people. And I think we sometimes have a tendency, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but we have a tendency to kind of separate that portion out in terms of even how it helps us to be effective Christians, effective God's people, right? And you know, and all of this is kind of a part of that conversation because, you know, I think we tend to like segment it all, but it's all kind of intertwined in this ability to, and this awareness to be able to understand our culture, how we grew up, and then also just what it means to be Christians. And I'm going to ask you some questions about that in particular to your workplace, but we're going to take a kind of like a quick little side detour, maybe some story time a little bit. Two things. One, and I prepped you earlier, but one, this one I didn't prep you up about. One, if there's a story from high school, from our relationship back then that you wanted to share, you have free reign to share anything. It could be anything that you want. It could be as embarrassing as you want. Just anything that you remember about our relationship, just to kind of give the listeners and the viewers just a little bit of context so you can think about that. And then secondly, share with us, like maybe one of the craziest or like just one of the, you know, just a story that you always think about in terms of what you do. And again, if you are new to this podcast, or if you're a listener who's new or viewer who's new, Grace is a senior VP of Atlantic Records, and she, you can kind of guess in terms of the work, the artists that she works with. We're gonna name drop here, but Lizzo, Missy Elliott, Pink Sweats, are just to name a few. And so obviously, she works in a very interesting environment. She works in an environment that most Asian Americans do not work in. But so just, and then also she works in music, and it's just not an industry that, again, many of us have our purview to in terms of having, access to that. So yeah, some stories about, something from your workplace that's interesting. That could be funny. It could be like something that you just was, just one of those memorable things. And then also something from high school. If you have anything, I have some stories, but I think it's more interesting to hear from you particularly.
I think for high school, when I think of high school, I don't really have a particular story, but I think of like how we were president and like treasurer or whatever. We were some sort of officer for like everything between you and I.
All the nerdy clubs.
Not just, but you know what? At our school, all the cool kids were nerds. Not nerds. All the cool kids were smart. So like our school was run by really, really smart kids who just happened to be very cool and popular. I'm not going to put
our senior class especially.
I'm not going to put myself in the cool and popular category, but I'm going to put myself in the smart category. In high school. But like you and I, like, were you president of orchestra or was I? Like, I don't.
You were president. I think you were president. I would not have been an officer of anything in orchestra because I was the biggest slacker ever. I never practiced. I never did anything. Yeah, I just showed up and just played because I wanted to go on the spring trip. That's the only reason why I was in orchestra. So
then I was president, but then like things that like people don't know about Pete, this is my favorite, was that he was prom king.
Indeed.
You were definitely prom king. That just puts certain things into perspective for some people. Mm-hmm. When I told your wife that, because your wife definitely didn't believe you, I confirmed for you.
Most people don't believe me.
No, I'm like, nope, he really, really was prom king. And Christina's mind just blew up right there.
Yep.
So that's one of my favorite tidbits to share. Like, I think I was treasurer of the Math Honor Society, and maybe you were in that. I was definitely.
Yep, I was.
I was president of the Spanish Honor Society.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like I said, all the nerdy clubs.
Any accolade. But then, like, I don't know, like, you played basketball. Like, we were just like High School Musical before High School Musical was a thing.
Yeah, that was kind of our life. And I was the biggest slacker during my senior year. After I got into college, I did the early acceptance thing.
I think my favorite thing too, and I think back on this, is that like by senior year, we definitely slacked. And but we slacked and still got good grades. And in hindsight, and even in college, like I was getting B's, barely trying, going to a very, very expensive school. And I wonder if I really, really tried, and if you really, really tried, like, where would we be?
I would have gotten better grades for sure. My senior year was, after I got into school, I remember getting the acceptance letter, December 7th. My dad didn't believe me because it came so early. And then after that, I just went out and bought a whole bunch of University of Virginia paraphernalia. And then I wore that every single day because I wanted to rub it in everyone's faces because no one thought I was going to get in early because I was a slacker. And then I stopped trying. I remember I had office aid, 5th period, and then I had orchestra 7th period. So every single time we did that, literally from then on, I was only there literally 15% of the time. There's all sorts of other stories, that in high school people don't believe some of these stories, but they're legitimized. Almost, what was the biology teacher's name? The one that everyone didn't like. All I remember was I cooked steak and shrimp in Peterson's AP physics class, and that was the year when they were doing construction and remodeling. So we were in again, I don't remember his name, but we were in the biology teacher's room and we used his room.
Peterson.
Yeah. So Peterson's a physics teacher, yeah. But then the biology, I don't remember his name. But he was, the biology like classrooms have that little like midway, like kind of in the back, like that little place where you keep like I guess all the chemicals or whatever.
I'm definitely googling Pete Peterson after this podcast.
Yeah, you can do it. Anyways, I remember that the biology teacher, he was deathly allergic to shellfish. And again, for people, I brought in raw steak. I took orders, steak and raw shrimp, and I cooked it on a George Foreman grill in the back of my AP physics class because our AP physics teacher, Peterson, he said we could, or he said I could. And then the biology teacher whose room we were using was in kind of like that backward office area. And the fumes from the shrimp that we were cooking on the George Foreman grill sent him to the ER, and he literally almost had some bad things happen to him, and so that got shut down pretty quickly. There's stories like that.
I did not know that. The Pete that people know now is Pastor Pete, and he's reformed and saved and loves Jesus. But and I'm not saying that you weren't saved before.
I wasn't. Let's just be real. I wasn't. I was pretending. I went to church, but I didn't know Jesus. Let's be real.
But high school Pete was a punk. I mean, we loved him. We loved him very much, and he was our friend. But high school Pete was causing trouble. I remember Miss Crum being like, Pete Chung, like every period. But we loved him.
Yeah. So funny little anecdote side. So again, I told you at the beginning where the pictures came from. My dad brought a box of just photos from high school. And I kid you not, there just aren't any dudes in any of these pictures. It's all girls. It's like just shows you what I was all about back in those days. Jesus is real, y'all. He can change your life. And Grace knows this because again, she's known me since 7th grade. And so those are just kind of funny things. If we have Grace back on, hopefully we will. Hopefully she'll be here once all this pandemic stuff is over. We'll have her literally in person down here and do something kind of live. But she can share more stories because there are some interesting ones. But let's get to some of your workplace stories because I think again. You work with artists that we all know. And if you just name dropped all the ones and you were just like you were saying you were in Philadelphia at a shoot, which means you were on set at a music video or whatever. Yeah, give us a story or two of just some things from your work life that you think are just really memorable and things that just kind of stand out to you.
I think the only thing that is memorable and that I can share is one time I was working on something. And it was 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock. I don't remember. And it might have been a Friday night. but I got a call from a random number that was like a young lady called, and she was like, Prince is going to call you in a few minutes, so please stand by. And I remember being like, where did you get my phone number?
Right. How old were you when this happened?
30?
Okay.
31?
So you weren't with Atlantic then. You were.
No, I wasn't with Atlantic.
Okay.
But I remember like being like, Prince is calling me? Okay. So I just had my phone on the couch like the entire time, just like waiting for this phone to ring. And I like the phone finally rung, and I was like, hello? And this man on the other line sounded so far away and was like, hello, this is Prince. It's a pleasure to speak with you, sir. How can I help you? And, something transpired, but I remember just being like, what just happened here? Why are you calling me? And he talked to me about something that he needed. And I remember like hanging up being like, okay, I'm going to do whatever he asked. But then I sat there and I was like, do I have Prince's cell phone number? So then what I did was I actually called the number back because I'm such a loser. But I dialed the number, and the phone number was not a real number. Like, it didn't go to a mailbox. It was very much like, the phone number does not exist. And I was like,
burner phone. It's Prince.
That's my favorite story.
Man, yeah. There are probably other stories. I've heard other stories off the record that Grace can't tell, especially stories of where she shows up to like a music video set and it's just not the world that she grew up in, but it's very familiar to her now, obviously, because she's dealing with artists all over the place. But yeah, I can't. Sometimes I just try to picture what you do. Obviously there's a lot of work that goes involved, but some of the relationships that you have and the artists that you see, and just some of the creative process that you think, I think it's just dope. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, getting a preparatory phone call that Prince is going to call you, and then being called by Prince on a burner phone, and then not being able to reach him back because he's Prince. That's. I
think the person called because most likely I would not have picked up, because I don't pick up numbers I don't recognize.
Does that work for you now? Because I'm guessing people probably call you from all over the place. No.
I don't pick up phone numbers I don't recognize.
Oh, interesting.
Unless I know to expect a call.
Right.
And now thinking about it, I'm like, I'm wondering if this person called and then texted me saying that, because it's not like me to pick up a phone call that I don't.
Do you have one cell phone, two cell phones? Just one?
Yeah. I think that's why I'm protective of my cell phone. But in today's work from home environment, I have no choice but to use my cell phone.
Right. Yeah. Oh man. I wanted to get into this topic with you because you would know it better than most. So kind of, I remember, so both of us kind of had lived this typical Asian American story where we did really well in school. We went to really good colleges. NYU is obviously one of the best in the nation. UVA is a public school, but it's still one of the better ones in the nation. A whole bunch of nerds go there. And so we were expected to do really well with our lives, yada, 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 so on and so forth. And neither one of us in the industry or in the vocation that we're doing it in, let's be honest. And again, I don't remember where I read the statistic, and it may be outdated, but as of before I moved to Houston, I remember I was studying this in Canada, and I had read somewhere a reputable stat that said a good chunk of our top 10% of our major universities, the best, the Ivies, the best universities in the nation and in the world, are made up of Asian Americans. That you've turned this, reference this term model minority, and it's definitely like a real thing, or at least a term that we use. So a good number. And I remember that number was pretty high, like even to the point I was like, what? Like I think it was like in the 40s and 50%, some ridiculous number like that. But then obviously when you look at the Fortune 500 companies, in terms of like senior leadership and people who are doing well, or just people who are up in those companies that are leading, the number was like less than 1%. Like, just wasn't, there was no, like you said, there was no representation. And things have changed, obviously, over the last few years, even in media, and particularly in on film, on the screen, even in music, with K-pop and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that's interesting, again, I work at a Korean church, and so, me doing what I'm doing, regardless of how well I'm doing it, this is kind of the context. But you don't work in a Korean specific, and more particularly Korean saturated or Asian saturated field. And you are a female, and we're just going to be honest, like, being a female, that creates a whole another level of, complications or challenges in terms of, climbing the ladder, but more so than that, just being able to kind of break through that ceiling where, yeah, we could have all the best grades and we could have all the best accolades, at least up to school. But then when it comes to the real world and getting a job and progressing up the companies and really being able to have an influence and kind of where that education really begins to make a difference. You have gotten further at a very quick rate. Again, being a senior VP, being where you are in the company, a company of a stature of Atlantic, is not a small feat. And for all the listeners and viewers, Grace is 36 years old. She's not very old. She's very young. In the corporate world, she is a baby. And so for you to be in the position that you're in, and then to be working with artists that aren't Asian, you're not in a K-pop division, that's not what you're doing. Tell us how that kind of, because again, it's difficult. Statistics will tell us this just doesn't happen very often. And you obviously, you talked about how at one point with your parents, you kind of had to stand up for yourself and say, no, this is the life that I'm living, and these are the choices that I'm making. But how has that experience been for you? Where did you finally feel like, because the way I imagine, and then even in our conversations, I know that it was difficult. There was a lot of difficulties all throughout, but where, kind of like how did you go from being almost kind of like you just couldn't make it, and then you just kind of had a breakthrough? Like, how did that happen? Give us a little bit of insight in terms of breaking that, quote unquote glass ceiling that many of us seem to have.
I mean, I think what you're trying to say is not only am I a minority, I'm like a minority.
Right.
I think first and foremost, like, as they say, blessed and highly favored, like, this is not something that I could have done by myself. And I genuinely mean this when I say, like, I'm not special. Like, I'm not the smartest person. I'm not the best person. I'm not like that at all. Like, I am supplemented by all things God in everything that I do. But I also work really hard, and I am relatively smart, and I'm a kind person, and I think all those work in my favor as well. But ultimately, I think the thing that I want to share with you and, the people that you shepherd is that, like, it is not enough for you to be smart. It is not enough for you to work hard. If anything, those things probably mean the least. And I hate to say that, but I tell my aunt, and my little niece / cousin, who is now 17, is that, like, you getting straight A's does not guarantee you success in this life.
You just put a dagger in the hearts of so many parents. And
you know what? That's very intentional. And that's why I'm starting this segment that way, is that, like, I want to tell every Asian parent and every Asian kid and student out there that, like, you're getting straight A's and getting into the best college does not guarantee you success. Because I can tell you that there are a lot of people that I work with, and it's not just my industry, or maybe it is a relatively big part of my industry or influenced by my industry, is that, like, there are people who are in my field who did not go to college, who aren't as poised as I am or well-spoken, but man, their hustle is great, and their talent is great, and their taste and tone are great, and their ability to talk to other people is great. Like, those are life applicable skills. Like, my getting a 5 in on the AP calculus test, like, does not mean jack in this world. And I think that mentality is what has kept some of us back. But then there's also real discrimination and real racism out in this world that people don't know about. I think of things like, you know, when my legal name up until I got married at 32 or whatever, my legal name was Eunhee Kim for a really long time. It was Eunhee
Busting
Kim.
out the Eunhee. That's right.
You know, I don't know if you, I think your legal name was Ram Chung for a really long time.
Ram Chung until I was 24, 5, something like that.
Did you change it when you got married too?
I did. It became Peter Chung right before I got married. I went to Canada and I was still Ram Chung and I wasn't a citizen. And then I became one kind of my first year there. So 2008, 2009.
So, okay. So there's a reason I'm telling you this part is that like I do marketing for a living and I sort of had to market myself in this world. And that has many, many different layers. But part of that marketing was like, it's a real thing when I say that I did not put Eunhee Kim on my resume. You know, it was very much Grace Kim. But then every Asian who listens to this podcast knows there are a million Grace Kims in this world. There are a million Grace Kims in the world. And if you Google Grace Kim right now, my face would not pop up. But man, when I got married, my husband is like, man, like, I'm so like, I love that you took my last name. It was like such a non-question for me. I love that. And I'm like, dude, it was selfish. like Grace Kim James is so much more appealing. Or Grace James sounds like a rock star name, you know, and it's.
Are you related to LeBron James? I mean, you know.
Yeah, Rick James, LeBron James, whatever. And like when I was changing my name, I very much had like an identity crisis at the courthouse. Like I scratched the paper like 12 times before I changed it. If my earrings are hitting my AirPods, let me know. But like the name and the branding that I put forward for myself, like was a real thing. And I think this is something that I talk about more now in my mentoring phase of like talking to young kids, especially college kids who are now working in, you know, entering the workforce, is like part of your brand is your social media profile. And there are a lot of you out there putting things on there that you do not want to be known for. Or maybe you do. And that's a different conversation.
Right.
But like as an employer, I am very much looking up what you're about, because it's not just about your resume anymore. It is very much about like, I'm going to Google you. I'm going to see what you're about. I'm going to see what your hobbies are. I'm going to see what, you know, you're passionate about. I'm going to see what you're talking about. I'm going to see how you talk. You know, those are the types of things that I'm looking at. And that's very much a part of your personal brand. So those are two takeaways. The third thing I do want to go back to is like, man, being smart is not enough. And I think for so long, our culture is very much like, if you're smart and you work hard, someone will notice. And I'm sorry to tell you that someone will not notice. They may notice. They may be like, oh man, Pete is a great worker, or he's really smart. But they're going to think about that for 2 seconds and move on.
Right. What else?
And the thing that I want to encourage everyone to figure out is like, what makes you you, and what makes you special, and what makes you different? Is it your personality? Is it the fact that you know, are really good with people? Is it the fact that you're a leader? Do you carry yourself a certain way? Do you understand what your mission is? Do you have drive? Like all those things come into perspective, and all those things are looked at under a microscope. But the last thing that I'll really drive home is that I would not be here without a voice. I would not be here without having realized to speak up for myself, because I realized that nobody else was going to fight for me and no one else was going to speak up for me. And one of the and I think in our culture we very much live in this utopian world of like it's fair, and maybe I'm being biased here, but like you grow up and you graduate thinking that the world is fair and that you have qualifications and skills, and it's not fair. And the only way for people to take notice is if you're literally screaming and you're demanding that people pay attention to you in so many regards. You have to be aggressive. Aggressive is not a word that you would use to describe our people and our culture. You have to be aggressive and persuasive in the way that you pursue your dreams. Like if there's a job that you want or a school that you want, you have to be aggressive and persuasive in getting people to notice your application. Like, and that means aggressive in like your extracurricular activities, aggressive in the way that you like communicate with, not with the way that you communicate with teachers, but like aggressive in like pursuing opportunities with teachers and like going above and beyond. But also when you're entering the workplace, being aggressive in the way that you fight for yourself. And the first lesson in that for me was when I was coming up in this business, I was making $35,000. My first job paid me $35,000, which in New York City is nothing.
Yeah, even
Granted,
back then.
Even back then. And I was making $35,000 plus overtime, and I was happy to because I was doing something that I was really, really excited about, like really, really loved. But like when this job was offered to me, it was like, it's $35,000, which is actually like $17 an hour or $16 an hour. You get overtime, blah, 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 blah. This is all I have. Okay, I'll take it. Come to find out, fast forward years later, I found out that the guy that replaced me two people after was making $10,000 more than I was in that same position doing less work. And that was probably like the biggest slap in the face because I was like, I'm sorry, I worked 3 times as hard, had 4 times more work than you did, stayed 10 million more hours longer than he did. And I'm sorry, he's making $10,000 more? Like, get out of here. And then I went to another place where I was like, my white male counterparts were making 3 times more than I was. And I was, again, doing more work, being more stressed than all these other people. This is not about money. This is not me being like, hey, you need to demand more money. Or this is not about like, hey, you need to fight for what that person has. This is about understanding your value and fighting for something that people tell you that you cannot have. This is very much about like, you will not get to a certain place if you do not vocalize that you want to get there, that you stand up for yourself, defend yourself. Like, there is no one else on this planet who will fight for you the way that you will. No one. Not Pastor Pete, not Grace, not your mom, not your dad. You are the only person who can get like you to the place where you want to be. And that requires being bold, and that requires you being countercultural, and that requires you voicing your opinion and dealing with conflict. I've had many, many difficult conversations. And trust me, in those conversations and in those rooms, inside, I am shaking because I don't want to talk about how I'm treated in the workplace, how much money I'm making or not making, where I want to go in this life, whatever. I'm shaking inside. But like those sorts of conversations have to happen in order for you to get somewhere in this world. And for me, in my career, that's how I'm tying this all together, is that like I've had to have the courage in order to get there. And before you get to courage, you have to get angry. And I think anger is another thing that we as a culture are like, oh, that's not a good thing. No, there's righteous anger. Jesus had righteous anger. He threw tables, he yelled at his disciples. Like, you have to have righteous anger in order to perpetuate like a desire in you to go fight.
So that's really interesting. This may be the tough because maybe it may not. One of the reasons, or maybe one of the primary reasons why we have you on this pod isn't just because you're my friend, but because you have navigated a life. And again, this is kind of tying everything we talked about today in terms of, the person you married, in terms of how you dealt with your parents and the kind of the culture issues there and things of that nature, but even in the workplace. And your workplace isn't a Christian workplace. It isn't any of those things. And you prefaced all of this by saying, obviously, without God, you're not getting there. And then you also said, yeah, I'm smart and I'm all these things, but I'm also kind. And I stay true to myself. And, you talked about how the social media profiles, like people look at that and what you're all about and things of that nature. And I joked and, not joked. It's true. In high school, I was not the person. Jesus had not saved me yet. And but in this career, and in the workplace and in the field that you work in, again, it is not Christian. I'm not going to say it's anti-Christian, but it's not Christian friendly for sure. How have you been able to continue to maintain yourself, continue to be who you are, and again, representing not only your culture as an Asian American, not only your culture as a female, but most importantly, your culture or in terms of your identity as a Christ follower? How have you been able to do that? Because I think that's the part that most people might struggle with. Yeah, you can, sometimes you feel like you have to do things that God would not be pleased with in order for you to, kind of make it, or like, navigate or progress up or whatever the case might be. Somehow there's a way and you have done it, not perfectly, but you've done it in a way where you never lost sight of the fact that you're a Christian. No, people around you know that you love Christ. Your marriage has been Christ-centered and all of those things. How have you, let us know your experience in that matter, because again, it's one thing to be like that in my vocation. I'm a pastor. I work with Christians mostly. And maybe if you're an engineer, it doesn't matter as much, maybe, or whatever. But as a person in the music industry, in the entertainment industry, I swear I can't even watch half of the music videos that come out anymore, right? I'm almost kind of thankful that I don't work specifically with just young people, because as a person who did work specifically with young people, I was forcing myself to watch like the top videos, the most popular stuff, because you just have to know via the culture. But I can't watch half the stuff anymore. I just feel like I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's going to be like trending. So then I click on it. And then after like 15 seconds, I'm like, nope, got to turn that off. I can't. Like if somebody saw me watching this, I would be in trouble. And so in a place where that can be a norm, where that can be a part of the culture, how have you stayed true to who you are as a Christ follower and then still been able to do well and kind of navigate the push and pull? How have you been able to do so where you indeed did fight for like representation or fight for, hey, I'm not being treated the way that I need to be treated, without having to go and do, I think, things that are hateful, things that are, whatever, inappropriate, so on and so forth. How have you kind of navigated that? I know it's a loaded question, but that's kind of where we're going to end, because I really did want to talk about this, because there are very few people that I know, and I don't know that many people in the world, but, that would be able to really speak in a way that is real and authentic, but also there's proof in the pudding. You're not where you are if all those things don't happen. And if God isn't, beside you, behind you, all around you, but also if you're not following Christ. And so can you give us a little insight into how you were able to kind of tie those worlds together? Because, sorry, I'm going on a monologue, but all the stuff that you talked about, if you take it out of this context or this pod or between our relationship, you don't have to be Christian to do any of those things. And in some ways, some people might argue that those things don't sound very Christian, which I would argue, that's all wrong. But so could you let us know how you kind of navigated that in real time so that you can help even our younger folks to go, oh, I don't have to compromise who I am as a Christian to be successful, to have a voice, to make a difference, to do the things that I love, so on and so forth. All of these challenges that many of us are facing, that you have navigated and are still navigating. And there's things that we can't talk about here on this pod, but that you are still navigating currently that I know of. And so give us a little bit of insight into that, because I think those are the questions that churches don't have the license to talk about in many ways, because oftentimes we're not represented in a way in the fields and in the workplace and vocations that I think are required, that maybe more than others.
It's not easy, and I'm not going to say that I'm not guilty of doing things that may be questionable to some people. I think someone recently on Instagram of all places, like questioned my use of the F word. And I was like, sir, there are bigger problems in this world than the use of my using the word F word, the F word. But point taken, as a Christian, point taken. Listen, I think ultimately how I get around it and navigate it is I don't do anything that I'm not comfortable with, but I think that also comes from years of experience and getting to this point. I'm sure there were things that I worked on that sold sex, that sold drugs, that sold crime and gang activity or whatever it is. I think the thing that I very much focus on is it is not my job to change people, because Jesus didn't change people by telling them that someone was doing something wrong. I mean, he did. He definitely called us out on it. But I think the thing that when you look back at Jesus' life, the change came from when people saw love and Jesus' love and how he applied and loved them every day, like, and how he applied that love. And I think for me, the thing that I focus on very much so is like the day-to-day interactions and the love that I can show people who normally aren't shown love. And, I often think about, even in today's climate, with so much going on in the world, how we just talk at people, especially on social media, where we like on our stories or on our posts, like literally talk at people and just tell them like, this is not right, or this shouldn't be done, or they shouldn't be doing this. You're not talking to somebody who's actually going to listen. If anything, you're talking so that those who agree with you will agree with you, or those who disagree with you will just ignore or walk away. And I think real change and real influence comes from you having a deeper relationship with the people around you to influence them in a positive way. And that just comes after spending time with them. That comes after you showing them that you're different and being the light of the world and the salt of the world. And ultimately then asking, like, why is this person different? And I think that's the way that I navigate this business, is that, like, I am not here to tell you how to live your life, because just as God gave me free will, he gave you free will. I'm not here to tell artists how to live their life or how to use their platform or whatever, but I'm surely going to use my life and my platform to live my life a certain way. And ultimately, like, that comes down to my relationship with God, and then also like being tapped into him on a regular basis and finding him as like my energy source. And I think when that is solid, like all the things around you just sort of like come to be. I think when you're growing up, you just feel like if I'm tapped into God, like I have to be a certain way, and then all my other friends won't like me, or they won't play with me, or they won't talk to me, or think that I'm cool. What you end up learning and realizing is that, like, if you just do you and you're confident in you and you are sure of like who you are in Christ, like all the things around you, people just kind of leave you alone, and they just say like, that's who that person is, And then in some cases, they'll come and ask you like, hey, why don't you smoke weed, or why don't you do this, or whatever it is. And then you'll tell them like, I just don't feel like it, or, that's against my beliefs, or whatever it is. Like, I think that change happens and influence happens in those kinds of conversations, as opposed to me telling an industry or a company how to go about their business.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about knowing our limitations and what we can change and impact, but to have dreams that indeed we can live, and what we do does indeed make an impact. And there's kind of this fine line between God is doing all things, and yet we are part of what He's doing, things like that nature. And and I think that's always going to be kind of the most interesting thing. The more we try to encourage, especially as an Asian American, Korean American, our youngsters, or to go and follow their dreams, and to not have to be kind of pigeonholed into certain things. that's going to be a major part of, our witness as Christians, our ability to build the kingdom. And then I think the most interesting thing is that you are dealing with people, as you said, that, most of us aren't. When you're an engineer, you're dealing with really highly motivated, highly educated, highly accomplished people. Same thing with, doctors or lawyers or whatever the case might be. But, you're working with people from all over the country, all parts of life, and your ability to love them in such a way that will point them to Christ, and that Christ can, and the Holy Spirit can nurture those things, I think is a very interesting thing. Do most of your, they're not clients, your artists and your coworkers, all that kind of stuff, do they know that you are a Christ follower, that you are a Christian? Just kind of interestingly, what do they, like you said, like, they kind of leave you alone, but what do they think about that? Has that ever been like an issue on set, or like kind of on a shoot, or even, in terms of the artists that you deal with on a daily?
I don't know if most people know, but I think there's always that window. And I think what I'm glad to know is that there are more Christians in the workplace. We just don't know how to like identify each other. And I think people who are comfortable, are like, look at God. And some people may just say that because it's a phrase right now. But when people say look at God, I'm like, yes, look at God. Or like sometimes I'll just write emails and I'm like, praise baby Jesus. And people think it's funny. And I'm like, oh no, I'm really like thanking Jesus that something worked out. I don't know that answer. I don't know if people would identify it specifically to being Christian. I think again, it comes from like the relationship, and those who have a closer relationship with me, working or non-working relationships, know that, that Christ is a very important part of my life, and that faith is a very important aspect of my life. And then I think more than anything, they probably associate that with like, oh, so that's why she's kind, hopefully. But you know what? The other thing too is there are other Christians that other people know who they don't get that kind of same vibe from.
Yep.
So ultimately, like, what's sad is that like being a Christian is not synonymous in our culture right now as being kind, as being loving, as being accepting. So it's been more of like an association of like, that's just who Grace is, and living up to the name of Grace. So I think we just have to do better on us, or like our part of like continuing to drive home and tying the knots of like, this is why I am that way and this is why I love you, because right now I don't think that people associate love with like Christians. And I think when you have that opportunity, you have to be able to say like, no, I love you, and it's because of this reason.
Yeah. I'm super excited about what God has in store for you. Again, things that we can't talk about on this pod yet, but just some stuff that's happening in your career, but also in your life, and just the many things I'm super excited about. Again, you being where you are at your age, and the many years, hopefully, that you'll have to be an influence in your industry and therefore the world and things like that. I'm super excited about that. Super excited about what, the kind of just the work that you're doing, but also personally and things like that. Super excited about where our relationship will continually grow to, and just kind of the things that we'll be able to do. And so I'm super thankful for you in so many ways, Grace. And again, as we reflect, and I'm looking at the pictures, they're just sitting here on the table. It's just crazy where God has brought us, and I think where God will take us. And so, thank you for joining us again. We're gonna, for time's sake, but also because I think we said quite a bit, and there's a lot there that the listeners and the viewers will have to chew on. I'm just thankful. Thank you again for joining us, taking your time to be a part of this, and speaking, and just sharing your story and being personal. Obviously, getting into things that are very personal to you, things that probably aren't out on this platform. It's on the internet now, so it's there forever, kind of an idea, and for you to be able to speak about that. And so, thank you so much. I've learned a lot, just even just about you, but also just about, I think, your character and everything like that. So,
last two things. Pete and I are both on the internet. Come find us. come message us and let us know what you thought of the podcast. And then 2, please, please, please register to vote. That's all.
Yep. If you, we haven't done this as well, but I'm going to leave that up to our editing extraordinaire, my intern, Chris, and he's going to put all of Grace's stuff in the whatever descriptions or whatever. So you can go find her and just link up with her. And then, like you said, if you have any questions or any kind of comments and feedback, we'd love to have them. And then hopefully one day when this pandemic is no longer a thing, we will have you down here in Houston and we'll be able to do some cool things in that regard. And then I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to maybe after a little while, you're going to get a couple of things and be like, oh, Grace, like I want to, work in the music industry. Like you're big time up there. You were on this pod with Pastor Pete. I know Pete, and so we'll see how those things go. That always happens. But I'm thankful for, just our relationship, but I'm also thankful for your voice and just kind of even the mentorship that you give in this medium. I'm thankful for you. So say hello to Mike for me and the dogs. Be safe in New York, although you should be saying to me, be safe in Texas. And hopefully we'll be able to do all those things. And like she said, please register to vote and continue to make change and represent Christ in the world. And thank you again for everyone checking out our podcast yet again. It's been fun. More things to come. And then maybe one of these days we'll just get on to a fun one where we just share ridiculous stories from our past and more things that we can do, because that was always a lot of fun. But thank you, Grace. It's good to see you. It's good to know that you're doing well. And until next time, bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.